So yeah, NanoHarmony is about safety. The OECD obviously works with all countries trying to implement policies and put up the test instruments that are needed to enforce those policies and risk assessments that are needed. The European rules ensure the protection of citizens and environments based on being able to do tests that we can all accept. Those tests, as the OECD sets them up, governs across the world. So if somebody's done the test, everybody else will accept them. And that's the background for the project. Next slide, please, Sean. It all started with the Malta project, really an initiative to try and work out how we got those nano guidelines as fast as possible into operation. It was to ensure that it kept the regulation and nanosafety guidelines could keep pace with innovation and get through to be usable formats both in Europe and across the world. So the member states set up the Malta initiative to work between the Commission and the OECD, chaired out of Germany, which is why Thomas should be hosting this and has given it to me as he can't be here today. Next slide, please. So NanoHarmony is said about developing and validating the test guidelines at the research stage and getting them to a format where they can start into the OECD process. It's about then looking at how to optimize the speed of that process, and that's working between NanoHarmony and the OECD NanoMet project, trying to get the stakeholders involved. I'll just mute Adam. Get the stakeholders involved and work out which bits of information is it they need to be able to pass the test guidelines and guidance documents through the process as fast as possible. It's about developing that structure of translating the science into methods and regulation as fast as possible. Today is really about the middle bit. It's about working out how do we identify the bits where things are getting stuck, where either the scientists or the people at the OECD side of the process are getting delayed because information isn't there that they were expecting, or the wrong information is there. Next slide, please. So NanoHarmony so far has had an introduction event, and then we've had 4 kind of workshops or webinars. The first was trying to identify the pathways and get that clear to everybody. The second was about gap analysis and what data requirements are needed to support the development. And then in December, we had the last workshop trying to fill those data requirements. And today, as I said, is about identifying and solving the barriers of moving from the science into the data and regulation standards, which will then lead on to a workshop again in July, where we're going to try and look at specifically how do we solve information bits of those barriers that are in the hands of the proposers and scientists. Next slide, please. So today we're going to hear from a group of IBM staff that work in the third work package of NanoHarmony. Eric's going to take us through the OECD process and also cover what is going to happen in the agenda for the rest of people, so I won't repeat that now. Sadly, Adrienne can't be here, so Laia is going to take over her presentation when we get there. That bit holds a Mentimeter element in it, so you will have to try and use your mobile phone or a separate web page when you get there, but instructions will follow, but just so you're aware. Next slide, please. So it's really about just sitting back now and listen. There is 137 people here, so we won't take oral questions between the presentations. Eric will just hand from one person to the other, and you can put any questions you have in the chat. Sean will monitor it, as will the speakers. Any clarifying questions for their presentations, they'll try and answer as the next presentation moves on, and Sean will pick up any themes and big questions that we then will cover at the end after the in the discussion after the presentations. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to Eric. If you can switch the slides around or switch these off so Eric can share his. I don't know quite what went wrong. I hope it works, but there we go. Thank you, Eric. Should have tested mine. All yours.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Klaus, for this introduction, and welcome to all participants. As Klaus already briefly introduced, this is the agenda for today, so I won't stay too long with this. Just mentioning that there's several of the presentations will provide you with information from the Go4Nano project, but that will be introduced later on as well. So my presentation will go is more or less a bit of a repetition, as we've seen in previous, as also Klaus mentioned, there were several webinars before this one, and the two of them were really on the different NanoHarmony projects, which I very briefly introduce here, but I recommend you to look at the webinars. They are available at the website indicated. If you've missed them, there's still a possibility to check them. Those November, December webinars were on the NanoHarmony projects, as I said, which are briefly summarized here. There's just so NanoHarmony is only working on a selection of the overall projects that are ongoing in Oecd. And today I will briefly summarize most of it, most of the 16th September meeting webinar to introduce exactly where we are for today's discussions. So briefly, and I apologize for those who were there in September, this will be a repetition of that, but maybe it's good to refresh your memory as well. So why do we want the Oecd test guidelines? The main aim is to get mutual acceptance of data. So data that is generated using these test guidelines in Oecd under good laboratory practices are accepted across member countries and some further adhering countries with the same data requirements. So it's testing it once and then it's accepted everywhere. And that is legally binding for those Oecd members that adhere to the MET mutual acceptance of data. Briefly on the test guidelines program, Oecd member countries usually suggest or indicate that they want specific topics to be tackled in a test guideline. And this is directed by regulatory needs for harmonized test methods and some priorities that countries have in various areas of their chemical safety. And there's different test guidelines available in different topics: physicochemical properties, ecotoxicity, both aquatic and terrestrial, environmental fate, human health effects, and pesticides residues chemistry. And next to that, there's guidance documents which are not covered by mutual acceptance of data, but they can provide further technical guidance for the use of test guidelines, or they can provide a test method that is not fully developed yet for or not fully validated yet for mutual acceptance of data. So how does it work in detail? There's clearly some scientific background needed on the one hand. On the other side, there's the regulatory need. Then, and especially for today, there's a regulatory priority for nanomaterials, but already looking at the regulatory field, more materials that may require further adjustments are popping up already under the vague name of advanced materials. I won't go into the definition or anything on that, but just indicating that we try to keep on track of new developments there. But from the scientific background and the regulatory need, a lead country or several lead countries together will decide on that there's a need for a specific test guideline, and usually these leads are supported by either research institutions in their own countries or research projects such as the NanoHarmony or Go4Nano or others. In an iterative way, the lead country and expert Oecd experts groups develop the test guideline. Near the end, there's several commenting rounds from those experts before actually getting a harmonized test method, which is robust and reliable for governments to base their regulatory decisions on. And then from there, we have the mutual acceptance of data and clearly the use in national legislations. So clearly, scientific knowledge and expertise is needed in these areas. But for today, the focus will be on this arrow here, how to get from the scientific background, state-of-the-art science and techniques to the regulations, the regulatory needs, and vice versa. How can regulators ask the right questions to the scientific community to get the answers they need? And with that, I would go over to Leah for the next presentation.
Thank you very much, Eric. Good afternoon, everybody. Today I'm going to talk to you about how knowledge flows can address the knowledge needs for regulators. Next slide. So I really want to start with the context. I know that NanoHarmony has been introduced here, but given that the focus today will be more the balance between, on the one hand, the scientific knowledge and the regulatory need, I think it's important to sort of step back into the context of NanoHarmony and see what the goal is. And the goal really is to facilitate further improved communication between science and regulation. And this process really would lead towards a more efficient process towards test guidelines. Next slide. So really NanoHarmony supports the development of a set of scientifically reliable test methods and good practice documents based on the translation of existing scientific knowledge and data into a form that has regulatory relevance. Next slide. So the theme of today's workshop is the identification and solving barriers for translating science to regulation. From the scientific science side, we ask the question, does scientific knowledge address regulatory needs? And from the regulatory needs side, we want to ask the question, do the test methods meet regulatory needs? So on the basis of this, we want to start with the problem framing. Next slide. So when you look at the scientific side, we know that knowledge relevant for risk assessment is often scattered and fragmented. And these gaps sometimes require two types of research, either exploratory research, which requires more of a fundamental nature, or it requires research in support of validation and standardization. Next slide. But from a regulatory needs perspective, there really is no structural or trans-regulatory approach for the development of a research roadmap in support of risk governance of nanotechnology. There really is a lack of systematic inventory of scientific needs for regulatory science development. The regulators are not really asked, what are your regulatory needs? And these are not they're not brought back to scientific questions. So really there is this limited connection between the developments of regulatory science and activities of funding and innovation agencies that can lead back to scientific knowledge. Next slide. So really what I want to point out that if we want to start talking about more efficient systems, we need to look at it from a system approach. And this means that we have to go beyond just knowledge generation, which is content and tools and the what, and really start thinking about process, which is the how, and organizational infrastructure, which is the who. This is extremely important if we want to move towards more efficient process, towards regulatory relevance, but also towards test guidelines. Next slide. And this really requires several things. The one is structured inventories. This has to do more with the content and the tools, the what. You need a transdisciplinary collaboration, which is the process, the how, and you need involvement of regulatory risk assessors and scientists, which is the who. Next slide. So today I'm going to share with you some lessons learned from Go for Nano and describe some of the things that we've learned at these different in a system approach. So from a process level, we've learned that a structural process connecting regulatory knowledge needs, particularly from risk assessors and research scientists, is needed to bridge the gap between regulatory needs and research. But we have also learned that a trans-regulatory approach leads to a more efficient process, given that many common issues were faced across regulatory domains. Next slide. We also learned that an organizational infrastructure is needed really to connect the different stakeholders. And there was a real need for a place for information sharing to sort of bridge this gap. Next slide. And from a content level, we learned that a structured approach was needed to first identify the regulatory risk assessment issues to ensure that these could lead to either test guidance or guidance documents in an efficient manner. And there was also a great need to have more informal ways of dialogue to share views and questions in a trans-regulatory manner. Next slide. So I'm going to just give you some suggestions of things that we can think about. One of the things we can think about to make this process efficient is to think about monitoring. You know, we can think about, okay, how do we measure that effective scientific knowledge gets attention from regulators? If you have, for instance, you have a test method, how do you ensure that regulators know that this method could help them meet the regulatory needs? And on the other hand, next slide, how do you create an inventory of regulatory needs that might be solved through research topics? So it's really this loop that is really important. And to measure progress, you need to monitor the effectiveness of this knowledge exchange. Next slide. And again, we come back to knowledge sharing. And if we go back, you know, we need these structured inventories, which is the content. We need a transdisciplinary collaboration, which is the process. And we need the involvement of both regulatory risk assessors and scientists, which is the who. Next slide. So I want to share with you some of the lessons learned from a monitoring scheme that we generated in Go for Nano under the standardization cluster to give you some ideas of ways that you can monitor, at least from the regulatory needs perspective. Within the OECD, you have the tool, the table. And here you can, for instance, measure and monitor the efficacy of the test guidance or guidance documents process, how it's perceived by its members. You can also think of maybe an inventory of the satisfaction of international members in having that scientific knowledge, data and tools being taken up by standardization bodies. But you can also start thinking about how do we create a monitoring system or a report or a methodology to be able to measure this progress. Next slide. And I think this really leads to the next presentation, which is, you know, we're going to provide an inventory of regulatory needs. How do we do this? So I think my colleague Susanne Weinholm will present to you a summit, Trans-Regulatory Risk Analysis Summit. So I hope through my presentation, you were able to address two things. The one is that you really need to think in a system approach, processes and people, in creating the podium for dialogue, or creating a place where you can have that exchange of knowledge, and monitoring systems to not only create goals, set goals, but also monitor whether you achieve those goals. And the second is knowledge sharing. And a summit is a great place to share knowledge in a trans-regulatory way. So I think I will end my presentation here.
Okay, thank you very much, Leah, for your nice talk, because you really nicely introduced my talk here. As was mentioned before, it is very important to ask the question, what do risk assessors want and need? And what I will do here is present for you the results from a Trans-Regulatory Risk Assessing Summit that we organized about 1.5 years ago in the pre-corona times. So next slide, please. This is a summary of the ideal situation in which normally, you hope that the regulatory requirements are in line with risk assessment needs, and that the integration of knowledge among regulatory domains is really going well. Also, consultation of regulatory risk assessors in a frequent way is something that you really would like to have, and all structural inventory of knowledge gaps and needs is also something that is good to have. In addition, a structural funding, despite urgency of needs, and a monitoring system, as Leah told, to ensure the efficiency of the process. Next slide, please. Within the Gov4Nano project, as Leah mentioned already, we have developed regulatory risk and research roadmap. It's a 6-step approach, which was nicely presented in our deliverable of this project. However, I won't go in detail here, but as a first activity to bring this 6-step approach into practice, we organized this Trans-Regulatory Risk Analysis Summit. It was organized in December 2019 at the RIVM in Bilthoven, and the primary goal there was to provide a forum to discuss knowledge needs for risk assessment, and the next step was to translate these needs into research questions for the scientific community. So again, here the connection is made between the regulatory needs and the risk assessment issues. Next slide, please. So we organized it and asked ourselves, why are we organizing this? Well, maybe it's a repetition of what's already said, but it's good to stress it again. So the risk assessors and risk managers within regulatory and inspection bodies and industry struggle to gain an overview of knowledge, which is fragmented across a multitude of regulatory domains. As a result of this, a lot of commonly shared risk assessment questions and issues remain unresolved. And if you look at the regulatory research agendas that are available, they focus mainly on particular domains, for instance on REACH, and often do not consult the regulatory risk assessors who are dealing directly with the dossiers in practice. So what we did, we organized a summit, we invited a large group of risk assessors from different domains, and this resulted in about 40 participants from 6 different regulatory domains, which was very nice because then we could discuss between domains about the issues that they encounter. So we had people from chemicals domain, we had people from the workers domain, environment, from food, from cosmetics, and from medicine and medical devices. Next slide, please. So how did we had the 2 days summit, and we did in the 2 days, apart from some plenary sessions and presentations on regulatory needs, what we really did was an interactive sessions with breakout group So first, we identify the regulatory risk assessment issues per domain. So the people from the same domain were put together, and we looked at which issues are really important for these people per domain. After that, the groups were mixed. So the groups presented and discussed the domain specific, well, in this case, the top two that they were found the most important, and that was discussed in a transdisciplinary group. So people were mixed, and then it was looked whether they had the same issues or they were really different from each other. After that, the relevant issues were selected, and those that were relevant for translating into a research question that could be sent to a funding agency for later maybe put into a call for research. And the final thing we did in the summit was to really write down the most important research question for a funding agency. Of course, because this was a quite limited amount of risk assessors, we had 40, but of course there are many, many more. So we developed a survey which was sent to a wider group of risk assessment experts, and they were consulted first to confirm and integrate the research issues we had that resulted from this summit. The second point that we also confirmed to and integrate to look at the transdisciplinary research questions we have as a result from this summit. And as a third very important point, we evaluated whether there was interest and what the options are for a permanent interaction platform. Because we really saw that also within the summit, people were very glad that they could discuss with each other the issues. And a very important result from the summit was that the issues they encountered except some of domain-specific issues, but most of them are really encountered in all the different domains. Next slide, please. So the results from the Risk Assessment Summit. I briefly summarize here a couple of research questions, and these were, we selected them after also the follow-up survey. So this is an integration of the results from the summit and the survey. And what we did, we selected 3 different research questions, and what is here mentioned in the table on the right side is the risk assessment issues that are the basis for this research question. And what you see here is that that the lack of knowledge on which the FIS-CHEM characteristics are essential for risk assessment purposes is one of the issues that came back really, really often. And together with a list of other issues, you see there's, for instance, lack of guidance in dealing with toxicokinetics, lack of understanding of the exposure pathways. Together with 3 other issues, we formulated a research question that case studies should be developed for the prediction and measurement of the toxicokinetic behavior of nanomaterial, including the transformation of these materials inside the body, the testing methods, and the measured data, considering the issues of data quality and reliability, which is also an issue that comes across very often, of course. And what is very important here, to use, to the extent possible, the lessons learned from the other materials. So this is a research question specifically focusing on toxicokinetics. In the next slide, you see that there was also a relevant research question on equivalence and similarity. So to identify the minimal panel of parameters to determine equivalent similarity in the different areas of regulatory risk assessment. So for instance, when based on FIS-CHEM is a nanomaterial equivalent or similar, also biological interactions, as well as toxicokinetics. And it was in addition to that to speed up the adoption of the described parameters, and also to identify parameters and criteria for grouping and read across. And you see in between brackets that there are either definition is mentioned, or hazard, or exposure, or risk management. So that is in the column of the regulatory risk assessment issues, because we within the summit we categorized the different issues in one of those 4 categories. But with the formulation of a research question, you see that also issues from different categories can be used within one research question. So in the next slide, you have the 3rd question that I would like to mention here, and that is on the identification of the usefulness of currently available exposure models for non-nanomaterials and how they can be used for nanomaterials. And so if they are useful, to validate these models for nanomaterials with measured data. And here again, the sharing of data, generation of data, and incentives is of course very important, but also data quality and reliability is coming back here. So, and the issues that are on the basis of this research question are a lack of validated exposure models for nanomaterials, and also a limited availability of really good exposure or release case studies. Next slide, please. Within the survey, we had a couple of more questions. For instance, we looked at, or we asked the people, the respondents, what research area they found the most important. So as I said before, we had 4 categories: definition, characterization of nanomaterials was one, research on exposure levels for nanomaterials, research on the hazard, and also the risk management, risk assessment strategies. And what you can see in this picture on the left is that, well, were all considered quite important. However, the definition characterization is, I think, most important for most of the people, and also the hazard. And in the right picture, there was one of the final questions of the survey: would you be in favor to establish a place and mechanism to gather input and share needs between the risk assessors and the regulatory stakeholders? And well, that was of course on the transdisciplinary issues. And there you can see that about 90% of the respondents found it a very good idea to have a forum, a platform, or something to really meet and share information with each other. Next slide, please. So what we had from the main conclusion we could draw from the summit and the survey is that the results we got from the summit are really confirmed by the follow-up survey. So they are really supported by a wider group of risk assessors. The results are also supporting the recommendation of a ProSafe white paper that was already written in 2017. And here you see that calls for nanosafety project should be, the topics of regulatory relevance are really important in that. So there there was already the need for a connection between the scientific community and the regulatory industries and bodies. And well, that was the last question in the survey, the risk assessment, and also in the summit, they expressed really the need for more informal trans-regulatory exchange of views and issues. And here I have a reference of the ProSafe paper. And I saw quickly in the chat that there was a question on whether these results I present here are publicly available. Well, as far as I know, there is the deliverable is a public deliverable of the Gov4Nano project, but at least the workshop report of the summit is available on the Gov4Nano website. Next slide, please. So to come back to one of the slides, the last slide of Leah's presentation, I hope that I could convince you that the Gov4Nano inventory of regulatory needs in this summit is, yeah, a good example of how the connection between the regulatory needs and the scientific community could be made. And I hope that it, yeah, that you do really see that this was a good, also for this NanoHarmony project, was a good way of making inventory of that. So with this, I'd like to give back the floor to the next speaker, and that's Leah again.
Yeah, sorry. Can I run the presentation through Métis, Eric? I'm going to do my best to do Adriana's presentation. Our apologies, due to sickness, she won't be able to share this presentation, but I'll do my best. Her talk was on developing regulatory readiness levels to address barriers and aid the flow of knowledge, and really looking for your feedback and discussion in this area. So first, I think from the previous presentation, there was a clear, through Eric's presentation, there was a clear path on how to go from the science to the, national regulation and through test guidelines. But there's also room for improvement. And I think what really is missing, that for all actors, you don't know at what stage in the process of knowledge generation you are to get regulatory relevance. So I think we want to introduce here this idea of regulatory readiness levels and see what you think and how you can help us and build this idea to a concept. But I want to start with the big picture, and I think it's important. I really do my best to explain this to you. This is called the quadruple helix, and it has different dynamics. So the quadruple helix consists of the economy, society, regulation, and standardization. And in the middle, you have science and innovation, where you generate knowledge, you have new technologies, and you also have new needs in social interactions. If you look at the economy side, you can think about, for instance, improved national earning capacity. You can think of improved valorization of knowledge or industrial applications, but we are in a transition from a linear to a circular economy. If you look at the society, we have never been in a world where society has such an important voice. So societal values and needs shape innovation, and society demands as well. And when you look at the regulation and standardization, we are really faced with the fact that risk governance is really trying to keep pace with innovation. So you have this sort of dynamics of this quadruple helix, but regulation in itself nor guidances are not a goal. And at the moment, there is much emphasis in Europe on tech development and innovation, and we want to meet sustainability goals. But in Europe, more specifically, we want to meet the goals specified and defined by the Green Deal, and more recently, the Chemical Strategy for Sustainability. So in here, you see that tech and innovation should really lead to improvement of economy. But economy in itself is going through a transition from linear to circular economy. So I hope this figure also shows the role of regulation and standardization as a supportive role. So one can imagine that if one aspect, one part of this triangle or this helix has a different pace than the other one, then it cannot reach its full potential. So let's think about knowledge development. So knowledge development plays an important role in this system. Let's say you have in the innovation side that knowledge development leads to new products. Let's think an autonomous driving car as an example. So this leads to new market and new businesses. But on the other side, you have also knowledge development having an impact on society. In this case, would you be okay of leaving your children in an autonomous driving car? Would there be aspects there that you would find disturbing or it would bother you? There's also ethical and legal issues. dealing with the autonomous driving car. And these aspects are really more dealt with in the social sciences. So this example that Adriana, this is her text, so I have to be clear with that. She gave me some ideas, really tries to emphasize the importance of having all aspects in similar paces, because if one pace, in the case of the autonomous car, the technology is ready, but the society or the regulation are not. Let's talk about the regulation and standardization. Let's take that aspect. If you look at the car, it has 4 wheels, it has brakes, it looks like the other cars, but there are some differences, and guidances will probably are needed to look at, for instance, these differences. We can look at the sensors, the software. So for the autonomous driving car, it is quite obvious the adaptations to what we would call the car regulation is needed. But we know from Nano that these adaptations are not so straightforward. So I think what Adriana wants here to point out is how important it is to have a synergy in pace and in knowledge generation in this quadruple helix. So I hope that it was clear that all parts of that helix are important and they all have their own dynamics. But now I think let's go back to this sort of our idea of regulatory readiness levels. I think it's really important to know, at least from a process perspective, where you are in the knowledge generation. You know, are you from science? Where are you from the science to regulation or regulatory relevance, or from the theory to an impact or knowledge development? So I think we need a tool to help us define this process. Another aspect is, what is the pace? If you have innovation going at an extremely fast pace, you really want to look, okay, what is happening in the social? Is this going to affect social values? Is this going to affect regulation or the economy? Is this going to be circular? So I think it's important to look beyond to all the elements of this quadruple helix. And finally, I think you want to connect and work together both within each part of the helix, but also between the parts of the helix. So I think these really form the basis of our idea for the regulatory readiness levels. Eric, in his presentation, showed this really nice scheme on how you go from scientific knowledge to guidances. But we really would like to take it a little bit further. We think that regulatory readiness should not lag behind technology readiness. There needs to be some type of synchrony between the two in order to make sure that regulation keeps pace with innovation. So I think for here, we wanna have defined levels of regulatory readiness that can inform and be used as a helpful tool for communication. But also, going back to the process and the system approach, we really need a process with defined steps to identify this readiness process, so that we are able to, in a structured manner, look up what are the next steps and save us from jumping and skipping different parts to different actions. So we want this process to be really, really structured. So I think that was our idea, or at least Adriana's idea, for the regulatory readiness levels. For technology, I hope most of you are familiar with the technology readiness level. And if you're not, I'll go through them really, really fast. So first it's divided into a scale from 1 to 9. And this just tells you how ready is your technology. Are you just in a basic principle? Are you in the experimental, like a TRL 3? Or are you more, technology is demonstrated in a relevant environment, or a 6? Or are you ready to put your product or your system on the market? So it just gives you an indicator how ready your technology is in that operational environment. And we foresee a similar system for regulatory readiness. And we hope we can get your input for this. So our first idea is, for instance, at regulatory readiness level 1 would be, for instance, identified knowledge needs from regulators. That could be a first. Or in between, gather knowledge and evaluate the knowledge. And then further moving to validation and evaluation, and maybe end with whether the knowledge is used in national regulation or in test guidances. So this is our first idea. So I hope you have your phone ready, because we really want to get your input in this. So I see a lot of chats. So if you go to menti.com and you put the access code 25259924, then I can start the first question. The first question that we would like to know is, which stakeholder group do you represent? Are you a regulatory risk assessor? Are you a policymaker?
I think you gave the code too fast, at least for me, Leah. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I couldn't follow that.
It's at the top. Sorry, do you see it at the top of the slide? Oh,
And the address, even.
Yeah, Sean, they're both at the top of Leah's current slides. So menti.com and 25259924.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, sorry, I have the share screen on the top, so I can't see it. And I think we have about 158 people.
Yep, that's correct.
Okay,
So, we'll check your mental sums quickly.
Or you can see it at the bottom right, 43, 46. We'll give people some time because I want everybody to participate. And this I thought was an easy question to identify which stakeholder group you represent. A lot of researchers.
Once you have picked your thing, you've got to scroll to the bottom of the page and click submit. If you haven't done that yet.
Thank you. Yeah, that's good tips to ensure that everybody. I would like to have everybody's input if it's possible. So I will give you a couple of minutes. A lot of researchers. That's regulatory risk assessors is second. Other, oh, I should have described other. Maybe if you're other, put in the chat, what is the other? That would be nice to know. Those 11 people in the other, then we have that information. Oh, it's gone slow at 97. Let's aim for at least 100, and then I'll move to the next question. Yeah, I don't see any more than 100. Maybe 100 is our magic number. Okay, maybe I'll move to the next question because I don't see the, oh, there's two more.
Yeah, the distribution is probably not going to change much in the last 40.
No. Let's just probably move to the next question. But it's nice to give us a reference for the next couple questions. Okay, so I'll move to the next question, which is, oh, we got 5 more. Are you a user of an OECD test guidance or guidance document, or do you contribute to the development of an OECD test guidance or guidance document? Really interesting, both, yeah. Almost an equal distribution between users and both. Not much difference. I'll give you a couple, maybe half a minute. Let's say 100 is our key number. Almost there, 4 more. And the distribution is quite interesting as well. 1 more. I guess I'll move to the next question, given I don't think any more votes are coming in. Okay. The next question that we would like to know is, do you think a regulatory readiness level system would be useful? This is a yes, no, or no idea. Yeah, you don't know. Oh, yes. Okay. So the idea is not that bad, although some of you don't know yet if this will be a good and only four said no. So this might be something to further develop. Okay, so I'll move to the next question. Do you think a regulatory readiness level system is useful for regulators? So I put a picture there to remind you of our idea of regulatory readiness level. So do you think to have a system similar to the technology readiness level will be useful for regulators? It's either yes or don't know yet. Okay. I'll give you another 10 seconds before I move to the next question. Okay, so the next question that Adriana had for you was, do you think a regulatory readiness level system is useful for scientists? So for instance, toxicologists. Do you think that having them think in this sort of regulatory readiness level for their knowledge will be useful for them? Here we get more yeses. So this could be something that scientists might find useful. And keep in mind that that quadruple helix that Adriana tried to, the picture of that synergistic quadruple helix system. Well, thank you. Okay, I think I'll move to the next. We have about 100.
No, before we moved on, we've just got a quick clarifying question here that Jacques has asked. Toxicologist, do you mean an academic toxicologist or an industrial toxicologist, or should it be both?
Both. This is just, would it be useful for toxicologists in general? And can you read the questions? I can't see the chat because I'm sharing my screen. So I really try to I don't know how to use. So please, can you read the chats? Because I don't see the comments.
We're covering the chat anyway.
Perfect. So just let me know if there's questions and I can address them so that we can get the right answer. So this is for toxicologists in general. Okay, so the next question is, do you think a regulatory readiness level system is useful for industry? Do you think if industry were to think about technology readiness level and regulatory readiness level, do you think this would be useful for them? Oh, most of you say yes, this is interesting. Although we have 24 with no idea, still unsure how this would fit. A very few no's, 4 no's.
But the reasoning behind those, there's sort of been 4 to 8 no's all the way through. Those reasonings will be quite interesting when we get to the discussion.
Yeah. I would like to get more into the discussion of how do we build upon this system. So first we want to know whether our idea is meaningful, how everybody thinks about the idea. So yeah, I would love to open the floor to discussion at the end. I think there's only a few more questions. And we're over 100, so I'll move to the next question. Others from whom it might be useful are useful systems. So we've mentioned scientists, toxicologists, we've mentioned industry, regulators. Do you think this would be useful for another stakeholder group that we've missed? And this is more a word cloud. So if you think of another stakeholder group for whom this, governance, yeah. No idea. Very honest. NGOs, public consumer, SMEs, academia, no idea. No, lots of no ideas. Yeah, we're still unsure. The public, journalists, validation bodies. I want to scroll down. Oh, here. Validate government, public, NGOs, funding organizations, the whole system. Yeah, that's a good one. Consultants. Policymakers. Consumer watchdog organizations. Consumers and the general public. Policymakers. I'll give it five more seconds and then I'll move to the next question, but really interesting. The watchdog, consumer watchdogs. Never thought about that one. Safety testing center, scientist modelers. Well, thank you for this, are very useful feedback. So the next question that Adriana had for you was, do you think the identified knowledge needs from regulators or regulatory risk assessors should form the regulatory readiness level 1? So it's our proposal, a good proposal of having the knowledge needs from regulators as the basis for the regulatory readiness level 1. Oh, this is no idea. Okay, this is a different, yeah. No, okay. I'll put the picture again to give you, to remind you of. No idea. So most of you don't know what RL1 should be. And there's quite a lot of no's. There must be other references that should be RL1. I don't see a lot of movement, so I'll move to the next question so we can get to the discussion, because I think there's a lot to discuss. Oh, there's a little bit more movement. And the next question was, what do you think should be in RL9? Accepted guidelines or guidances or other? So what should be the goal? The last RL9, what should that be? And here you just type in your ideas. I think this is so what do you think should be RL9? Let's see. No idea. Broad people acceptance. Oh, okay, more societal. Accepted guidelines, approved for use. So somewhere between guidances, societal people acceptance, active use in regulation, public health, environmental safety, but no idea is really central in the middle. If you look at the word cloud, lots of guidances, accepted guidance, that seems to be one of the favorites. Compulsory global use, standardized method, validated standard, so I think accepted guidelines seems to be a favorite. I'll give you 5 more seconds before I move, because I think we're still getting some votes in. And I want to get input from as many of you as possible, if you are willing to share that with us. Approved, okay. So I'll see what the next question was. If you look at knowledge generation and evaluation, and then the validation and evaluation, these are now in Adriana's picture, the middle step. Do you think these are sufficient? I think that was her question. So the middle steps between RL2 and RL8 should cover aspects of knowledge generation and evaluation, and validation and evaluation. Do you think these are sufficient? Yeah, most of you have no idea.
Right, there's just a few more questions that are being asked.
Yeah.
What is the difference between validation and evaluation?
Ooh, Adriana did this, so I'm not. I would consider them as one step, that you generate knowledge and you do an evaluation process to see how that knowledge generation, if that's adequate, and also validation, that you take extra steps to make sure the validation is in the process. That's what I interpret from it.
And then another qualifying question is, do you mean guideline, i.e. test guideline, or risk assessment guidance, including the guideline as method for getting the information?
It could be either, because it's not right now identified. We don't know what the RL9 is. So I would assume one or the other. Because we're trying to use this inventory to see how we give shape to this idea. But I think there's a next question that if you said that this is not sufficient, that there's the next question gives you an opportunity to give feedback. I think I'll move to the next. Oh, there's still some more votes coming in, so I just want to make sure that we have as much input. Maybe I'll go to the next question, I think. Oh, there's one more. I'll give you 5 more seconds just to make sure that we have. And I think this question addressed, if previous answer was no, what intermediate steps are missing and should be included? So here's an opportunity for you to share your ideas with us on how you think this system should be shaped. So if you want to be as specific as RL1 should be this, or RL9 should be this, or the middle step should be, this is the place that we ask for your input. I said yes. Okay, thank you. Usable, harmonized, but that should be RL9, I guess. If I interpret this correctly? No idea. Acceptable criteria should be somewhere in the middle. Okay. Usable, harmonized methods. Reevaluate after acceptance. Oh, okay, yeah. Need time to think. Okay. Yeah, this is a tough question. Oh, you disagree with RL. Okay, so I guess we can have that discussion why you disagree with RL. I would like to know the reasons behind that, so we can take it for feedback. Availability of fair data. Harmonization. I'll give 10 more seconds. This is a difficult question, so I want to give people enough time to think. Oh, somebody agrees with the test guidance endpoint? Fairness. Usable, harmonized methods. Match science with regulator. That is a good one. Because that's today's topics today. How do we match the science with regulatory needs and ensure that the science that we generate, the knowledge that we generate, has a regulatory impact and relevance? Method principle established. Workable in multiple labs. 10 more seconds, because I still think these are such great ideas, so I really want to give you enough time to share them with you so we can take them up in the discussion. Test cases, feasibility versus regulatory, updated methods, animal testing reduction. Yeah, I think we don't see any much coming in. Oh, one more. I'll give 10 more seconds and then I think this is the last slide, if I remember correctly from Adriana. Dissemination, yeah. Output resolution works. Simplicity, dialogue, repeatability, voluntary reporting. These are great. Thank you so much. I think I still see a few coming in. And how are we doing with time? Are we on time or can I take a few more seconds so I can get as much input?
You can take a bit more if you want. We've got 14 minutes left.
Yeah, and then we can probably go through a discussion because I see really good ideas coming through. Economic impact of regulation. Evaluation continue. Limit values. Inform academia. Yeah, there's some really good ideas here. Costs. Reevaluate after acceptance. Bring text complete. Yeah, thank you so much. This is really great input. Yeah, I think I'll move to the next. I think that was the last question. Yeah. I think that was the last question at the end of this presentation. So I'll exit here and I'll stop screen sharing. Thank you very much, everybody, for your input. And I'll bring it back to you, Klaus, for discussion.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Eric and Susanne, as well for your initial talks to set the scene. I think this is really useful. There's definitely different opinions out there. You could see from an overview. I'll give Sean a bit to sort the document out with the questions. You could see that there are some people that think about this wider than just establishing a test guideline, much wider in terms of social sides and things you wouldn't necessarily connect with the process of just getting to through the WNMP and WNT steps as we see them. Maybe there's definitely also some people that didn't think we needed RLs, so maybe that's a good place to start if anyone's willing to share. Okay. It would be useful to know. There was I spotted one in the chat that scrolled past and said, there's already systems for this. We don't need a new one. Why don't we just fix what's already there that might not be working? I can't remember who it was.
This was me.
Yeah. Do you wish to elaborate?
I mean, I made a general comment on this. I don't mean that we do not need another complementary systems or whatever, but there is already an established system of bringing scientific knowledge to a regulatory application. When I'm talking about test guidelines and guidance documents, because another thing in the presentation I have seen there is that when we're talking about regulatory relevance level, I was not sure whether we were talking about technology or about the regulatory relevant level of a project, of a test guideline or guidance document. But going back to the test guideline and guidance document, which is where I know a little bit more, there is already a system that should work. In theory, is the systems of the national coordinators of the test guideline program. And many of the participants in the summit that you have mentioned regarding this are from countries that are very active in the test guidelines program and seem to have expected to have a good functioning of the national coordinator system that brings on the one side, has the duty and the obligation to transmit the regulatory needs to the national scientific community, and on the other hand, based on the knowledge gathered from the national scientific community and the proposal that comes from there, has to manage to propose projects, test guidelines, guidance documents to the OECD. So maybe my comment there was, okay, these systems that has been now being developed or in current development by NanoHarmony, I don't say it's bad or not necessary or whatever, but maybe what we need is that to make the systems that already exist work appropriately. So as I see that many of the people that were in the summit came from, for instance, the Netherlands RIVM, and RIVM is the national coordinator for the test guideline program as well. I wonder whether the problem is a communication inside, sorry, because I'm putting the finger on someone, but it's just an example, is a communication inside the IVM, or in the other case, inside Denmark and inside Spain, that is my country, by the way. So, I mean, maybe it's a system that already exists, needs to be somehow fixed or enhanced, or instead of creating a completely new system that is another layer of maybe complexity, or what would you like to propose? Replace one system by the other, or what will happen?
I will start. I think the intention here was definitely sprung from a conversation about how do we make the people that will supply the knowledge into the test guideline system realize that there's a need for their science and what the next steps are in making that science regulatorily usable. It then has also obviously the expansion to you could deal with the whole product. So I think both are relevant. We can discuss that later, I guess. I don't know whether anybody from IVM wants to comment on the intention here, whether it was more for the product and whether the middle bit was for the test guidelines, but the product obviously tops and tails that.
Yeah, I think a lot. It was more to connect in the system, because I think we know that the knowledge is scattered. We know, and we're not proposing a new system. We're just trying to identify the steps of the system so that it becomes more clear. So this is just outlining the steps so that we know where you are and you know the steps that are needed to get the knowledge to regulatory relevance. But also we see applicability for novel innovations, so you can have other stakeholders use this also to see, okay, where am I in terms of regulatory relevance? So I understand Juan Riego's point here. I think the pub is in the national. I think if you look at the diagram from Eric, that was it's that system, that linkage. But I would love to ask Juan, how do you think you can fix this? How do you think you can make, for instance, in Spain, that system where the knowledge, let's say you create a test method that gets, to the right coordinator, but also that regulatory risk assessors are being asked, okay, what do you need when you're looking at assessing a dossier? What information do you need so that we go back to science? So I think that is and it's an idea. So I think it's just more to share ideas on how to fix the process and how to move towards an efficient system of knowledge from the scientific to the regulatory needs.
Can I say something here? Because we are talking about innovations all the time. We work with the people developing products, and I see a big gap here. We are now going all the way down to testing guidelines, and the people I work with, they really are way far from that. I think there's a nice idea what you're proposing. We have to specify it better, because like I was working with someone developing a sports watch, which is an innovation. And for those people to think about test guidelines, I mean, they don't even think about that at all. I don't know, I see a gap somewhere. I cannot really put my finger on that, but I see something is missing here. Yeah, we may need to specify, are we just focusing on testing first, perhaps? Or, I mean, otherwise it's too broad. I mean, even when you're talking about scientists don't care about regulation. I was a scientist for 10 years. I was not really thinking about regulation at all. So I did, what kind of scientist? So maybe we need to fine tune this. Of course, a little bit more. I know there are nice ideas and we have to discuss. And I like it, but something doesn't fit within innovations and test guidelines.
Narrow the scope. Narrow the scope.
To me, there's a huge gap.
Yeah, because I see there's two pathways. The narrow the scope from how do we get from the knowledge from that we for test methods, and then the other question is more the innovation side. How do we use it to link that innovation system? So I do see there's two processes that need to be separated.
And if I may, maybe, I don't know, as you put the question to me, I don't know how I would fit the system, because at this moment, I have no idea. This is the typical answer today. But for instance, some committees exist. For instance, when someone is intending to develop or propose a method of what we call now new approach method, that usually was called in vitro methods in the past, but now the concept has been expanded. We know that, for instance, in the ECVAM, in the JRC, we have the committee called Parere, that is exactly a committee that is devoted to analyze regulatory relevance of the proposed test. So some of these initiatives already exist. On the other side, I would say that also is the duty of the national coordinators to assess whether a method has regulatory relevance. So it's fit for the purpose, for the regulators, and for which regulations and field of applications when we are talking about test guidance document. For innovations and other things, this is another issue that I completely agree that is a different process. So we have to distinguish and try to separate this more clearly. And I think, Leah, and this is, don't take us as a criticism, is just as a positive comment trying to improve. I think in your presentation, these two concepts were a little bit mixed. And it was my impression, very personal. So I offer it as a feedback, but
okay,
these were my impression.
Yeah,
we need to distinguish.
Okay.
Thank you for the feedback. I agree. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Eric, have you got any comments? Otherwise, Sean, if you got a document with a sort of summary questions, we can see what we can get through in the next sort of 10 minutes and run over a bit.
Well, while Sean is looking, I think it's good to better think ahead and on the exact boundaries of such a system. What do we want to use it for? And I think I agree with Juan that a system in OECD with national coordinators is there. But I really have a question on whether scientists actually know that it's there and that they can know how to approach the national coordinators. And I saw somewhere in the chat that some countries don't have a national coordinator. So if you're working in Portugal, are you how easy is it then to how easy is it?
I'm sorry, all the European Union is a member of the OECD.
Yeah, I know, but it's an extra hurdle, I think, Juan, that makes things difficult there. So I think that there is there's some possibilities for improvement in the system. I'm not saying that it's not there, but there's some improvement.
I agree with it.
I think one of the things that we certainly noticed when we were writing the proposal was that a lot of the industry we talked to said there was evidence requirements in in regulation coming up that there was no guidelines for. So it is about short-circuiting that. And I think Eric's right that the scientist at the bench won't know that the need is there for something they have. So I think it is a case of making sure they know how to put that in. And you know, it's obvious from the questions that, you know, at least some people in Portugal don't know where that person is that they should be talking to. Probably that national regulator don't know what's going on everywhere else in Portugal to go and contact them. So I think that information step definitely needs to be there. So I think there might be a need for an IL0 of we need to be able to measure something, and then the IL1 is somebody identifying that they can. Sean, do you have any questions that you can put up, or do you want to read them out?
Yeah, I've just quickly managed to grab a few and put them on a slide. There are more questions that I can read out, yeah, if needs be. But certainly the comment was made that the regulatory summit sounded like an exercise that was already done under NanoReg a few years before, but could be something that's worth to be repeated at regular intervals. And this really comes back to some of what the discussion has been talking about, which is just keeping the dialogue points open between regulators, industry, policymakers, and everybody else. A question probably directed towards the speakers is, are the regulatory authorities taking into account the observations made and reported by the GLP monitoring authorities? And then there was quite a bit of discussion around the RRL levels and whether 9 was the right number, or whether 9 was maybe a few too many. And there was quite a few, there's about 3 or 4 questions asked around that. And then a point that the last step would need to include methods that can be implemented. So again, more from an industry perspective, that general guidelines is not sufficient. There needs to be acknowledgement of how industry can actually become regulatory compliant. And then again, a comment around the validation process for OECD test methods that exists, but for things such as regulatory guidance, there isn't a validation process for that.
Yeah. Okay. Any immediate responses to that from the speakers? I'm aware we're running short on time and we're starting to lose a few people. I think the number of ILs is something that will be decided once we work out whether the process needs to cover the product or just the guidelines, or whether there needs to be different ones for test guidelines and for guidance. Eric?
Yeah, I think, well, clearly the number of steps, whether it's 9 or another number, is not that important yet. As long as we have the critical steps identified, I think then we get to a certain number at one point. And the GLP monitoring authorities, I'm not sure. I'm not too familiar with the GLP monitoring, so I'm not sure who that will be and what. But for me at least, it's hard to imagine that there is no interaction between regulatory authorities and GLP. But.
Okay. Any other comments, or does anybody who asked the question want to elaborate? Because obviously we'll take all of these questions, including what was in the chat, away and look at it in terms of how Work Package 3 develops this further. Okay. Good. Well, I think given where we are on time, the next installment to announce is that in July we will have another workshop, webinar, where we're going to go through lessons learned from the past. So we'll have Frank van den Kammer speaking from a beach somewhere nice, he hopes, about experiences are going through the system from science to final document and where the holdups were. And then we'll have other speakers from both the OECD and national authorities speaking to what they find are the bits where things get delayed between what the requirements of the system is for the guidelines and the guidance, and getting the information from the scientists. And I think sometimes we will, or in part of that, we will also have comments from the tasks in work package 1 of the guidance development within NanoHarmony, in terms of where they're finding it difficult to work out what is it that they need to deliver to pass the next step in the process to get from science to accepted guideline. So there's other webinars coming up and bigger meetings. They're all on the NanoHarmony website. You can sign up for the NanoHarmony newsletter and the events. There's also, as Eric said, a whole set of recordings of the back catalogue of workshops if you wish to go back and look at those. This one will go on as soon as we can get it downloaded and cut and put back up. But a notice will, as Sean said, go out to all of you with a link for that. So given where we are on time and that there were no final comments, then we'll stop here, and I'll say thank you on behalf of Thomas and NanoHarmony for your attendance today, and hope to see you in July. Thank you very much.